Let's talk about IDEs, Integrated Development Environments. We'll be using one for our coding. Now, if you prefer using something like Vim, Emacs, Notepad++, Sublime, or just straight up primitive Notepad, feel free. However, I'm pretty convinced that most of you prefer using IDEs. I'll be covering two. I'll be looking at Visual Studio and also JetBrains Rider. For Visual Studio, we'll be using Visual Studio 2019. So you can just type it up in Google, click on the first link, and select the free community version. We don't need professional or enterprise for this course. Now, I already have it installed, and once it is installed, you get this program called Visual Studio Installer. So we can open that up, and through here, we can, see that I have Visual Studio Community 2019 installed. You can also select other versions. It's kind of like the Unity Hub, but for Visual Studio. And we can also modify a version. So we can add some add-ons, for example. Again, similar to Unity Hub. So I'll click here on Modify. And I'm going to add an add-on here, Game Development with Unity. This adds the necessary libraries and plugins to have communication between the Unity editor and the Visual Studio debugger. So I'll just select this, click on Modify, and then we wait. Now let's go back to our lab 1. I'm just going to do a quick show in Explorer right here, and I'll set this to the right of my window. And now let's talk about .csproj files and .sln files. If you're used to C and C++, you know that there's no real standard to how to represent a project in those languages. Makefiles are a pretty popular solution, but they're not the only one. Now, when it comes to C# projects, C# is originally a Microsoft product. So there is a standard for it. If you're using Microsoft Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, or even non-Microsoft products such as JetBrains Rider or OmniSharp and so on, you're still using the same standard to represent the project. So it's basically the .csproj file that represents a C# project. A .sln stands for solution, and a solution is basically just a repository of different projects. So one solution can contain a testing project, a library project, and also projects from different languages. So you can have a solution with some C# code in there, some C and some C++. Why not? So the solution is really a Microsoft flavor kind of solution for packaging multiple projects together. For us, our solutions will only have one project, and that will be our scripts for our Unity project. So we'll keep things very simple. So effectively, or practically speaking, a solution is basically the same thing as a project, just for us, since our solutions will only have one project in them. Now, that's enough semantics. I'll stop boring you and let's get to the practical part of all of this. What we want is to generate these two files. We want to generate the solution and the C# project. So if I start searching here in my assets or library or whatnot, I won't find them because they're not there yet. Let's just go into Edit in the editor, Preferences, External Tools, and make sure that our external script editor is Visual Studio 2019. So if you correctly installed this IDE, it should already be selected. If you have multiple, you can select the one you want in this drop-down list. For example, I just switched to VS Code. Let's stay with Visual Studio 2019. Actually, here I have two versions, Community 2019 16.8.4 and this other one. I'll stay with this first simpler one, so Visual Studio 2019. And we want to make sure that embedded packages and local packages are ticked or checked. So this will actually tell the editor to generate the csproj files, as I mentioned. It will also, as a byproduct, create the solution file for us. Now, if you don't see Visual Studio in this drop-down list, you can click on Browse and go into your program files, find the executable file for the IDE, and just link it that way manually. So that's pretty rare. We usually don't have to do that, but you might need to. Anyways, so I'll just close this preference window and notice that here I have my csproj and .sln files now. If you don't have them yet, that's not really a problem. So I'll even go up and delete them. I'll do the same thing, preferences. So I'll open up this window and I'll click on regenerate project files. And there they are. I'm going to delete them once again. And I'm going to create a new C# script this time. And I'm just going to double click it. So this should now open it up with Visual Studio 2019 as we selected. And you can see that this is also another way to generate that project and solution file. So basically, as long as you set up your external editor for Visual Studio, once you finally open up some script, you'll get your projects for sure. If you don't have them, well, then we might need to look into it. So you can just ask us a question and we'll try and help you out. Now, you can confirm yourself that everything is working correctly because you should see here in your Solution Explorer the following. So there are no bugs, it doesn't say unavailable or anything like that. I can look at my assets, I can look at all my references to different libraries. In there we'll find the Unity engine, which is really critical. So Unity Editor, Unity Engine, there it is. And we see that our code is correctly color-coded. We have some Unity specifics here in Visual Studio. It mentions that this class is a Unity script. Here we have two Unity events. They're called messages here, but they're the same thing. We have the start event and the update event to communicate with the engine. And that's pretty much it. So if we really want to be sure, I can start writing debug. I got the color-coded thing for the class here. I can have my IntelliSense that can suggest different functions or methods. So I'll just write .log, for example, and I'm getting a tooltip that gives me information on this method, and I can start writing something like hello world. Now let's talk about Rider, an IDE created by JetBrains. If you've used C-Line in the past, you're probably already pretty familiar with JetBrains products. So, what's so great about Rider? Why would we ever want to use Rider over Visual Studio? Of course, it comes down to personal taste, but there are a few features that I find really interesting with Rider that are not directly accessible in Visual Studio. First of all, Rider comes packaged in with ReSharper, which is an industry standard. I would say that it's probably one of the products that really put JetBrains on the map. So I've been hearing about ReSharper since 2007. Yikes. Now, that's one really cool thing. If you don't know what ReSharper is, it's basically just a tool that makes writing C# code and performance C# code and modern C# code a heck of a lot easier. Now, the second thing I really like about this IDE, specifically for working in Unity, is that it has great integration and will also give us a bit more hints and more information when we're doing silly things with our code. So I'll show you a few examples of that soon enough. Quickly to download and install, just write Rider in Google, first link, and click on download. Now, this product isn't free, but it is free for students. So you can get an academic license really easily just by plugging in your Concordia email address when you're registering for JetBrains products. And you also get access to all of JetBrains products, which is really great. If you're pressed for time, well, you can just download it now and use the free 30-day trial. So let's go back into Unity now, and I'm going to switch my preferences external script editor to Rider. So I've already done that actually, and you can see that I still have these two things checked. So even if we're using Rider now, Unity will still generate the C# project file and solution file as previously mentioned without any problems. I'm going to open the same script that we worked on before, but this time my editor of choice is going to be Rider. And here we are. So Rider does a few things differently in its presentation. We can already see that these two using statements are grayed out. This tells us that these two libraries aren't used in this class, so they're candidates to be trimmed or pruned. We can also see that the update function isn't colored because there's nothing in it, so that's just a cool visual cue. But one of the really cool things that I like is that, let's say I do something a bit silly. Get component, let's say light. So let's just assume that the game object that has this new behavior script attached to it has a light object. I mean a light component, to be more precise. And well, let's complete this. I'm just going to say light equals get component light. So this seems really inoffensive, considering that we're taking for granted that there's actually a light to the same game object that has the script. But we can see the red line here. And if I just hover, yes, we do have tooltips, we have IntelliSense and all that stuff, just like in Visual Studio, but we also get this expensive method invocation. So that's pretty cool because it's telling us, hey, watch out, you're calling a get component in the update function. If I do it here, get component light, we won't see that same warning. So here's telling us, look, get component is a function that takes some time, there's some search involved in it, and you're calling it every frame, and you're always going to be returning the same object. So why are you wasting your time getting the same light at every single frame? Just get it once. So that's a really cool hint to help us optimize our code, especially when we're being a bit forgetful. Now, we'll look into that a bit more. This is really not pretty code, but it's just to show you one of the things I like about Writer. Obviously, it comes down to personal choice. You get to choose how you want to write your code. I'm just showing you different suggestions based on my personal experience.